Thanks everybody for joining us on another episode of Deep Space Chats. So this is the third episode in the season, and so far what we've been doing is really just focusing on what the Deep Space Institute is looking to do. So we have started with a conversation with the founder, Sarah Sabri, who went to space and spoke about that experience. And then in the second episode, we met a couple of the other members of staff that work at DSI and found out what interested them in working for DSI and being part of Sarah's mission about making space more accessible to all. And now here in this third episode, it's time to kind of widen the perspective a little bit and understand kind of where DSI sits in the broader industry, but also what it's trying to do with that mission. Why is that its mission, and what kinds of issues do need to be addressed in terms of accessibility into the sector? So just to help us get a sense of space and the space industry, the space economy, we are joined today by Emma Gatti, a former NASA scientist turned independent space analyst, publisher, and science communicator. She holds a PhD from the University of Cambridge. She's done postdoctoral research at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and Caltech, and now explores the crossroads of space, geopolitics, and society as the director of the Space Republic media platform. So, Emma, thank you so much for joining us here on Deep Space Chats.
Thank you, Stuart. That was one of the best presentations I ever had. There's so many titles in the end. It's quite confusing. Yeah. Well done.
Good. I'm glad I got it right, because that is important.
You nailed it.
So let's start then by just asking you, what is the role of a space analyst? What do you think that role is about, and why is that role, say, different to other jobs that people can do in the space sector?
Well, this is a good question. I call myself a space analyst because I struggle myself to call myself a journalist, because I don't have a background in journalism. So if I say I'm a journalist, people expect me that I study journalism, which I didn't. I studied volcanoes and geochemistry, and then I shifted to planetary science when I was already a postdoc. So I come from I have a scientific background and I have an academic background. So when I decided to shift from academia and from being a space scientist or planetary scientist to discuss and to analyze the sector from an outside point of view, from a more economical or analytical point of view, I needed somehow to find a name for what I was doing. So I call it analyst because in the end I do analyze trends in the sector and I write about it. If you have an economical analyst who does just the number, they might tell you that this title is incorrect. Let's say that what I do is on the edge between an analysis, an informed in-depth analysis, and the communication of this analysis. So I bring the two things together. I don't write reports the way consultancy write reports. I write articles, so I don't call them the reports, I write articles, which I like to believe maybe, that they're still understandable for what I call a general space or non-space informed audience. What does it mean informed? It means that you probably still have an interest in understanding the economic or geopolitics of space, so you still have a kind of background that allows you to understand the general. It are not proper outreach, educational articles like the one that you might read in the New York Times or in the Guardian, just to give you an idea. So I don't know. Sure. This is basically, I needed to find a container because society loves containers and tags and etiquettes, so I had to give me one.
That's fair enough. Yeah, and I understand what you mean, because I find a lot of people come into the sector in interesting ways. Yeah. Maybe in a lot of non-traditional ways, and so sometimes when you're forging your own path into something, you kind of need to come up with a label for it. So what got you interested in writing about space, and maybe particularly why you felt the need to kind of zone in on the geopolitical and economic side of things as your career progressed?
Shifted. This is a good question. So I left academia because I really wanted to go in communication. I really wanted to go more to write. I always wanted to be more of a writer rather than a scientist. But it was very difficult to make the shift when I was younger because I'm not native English speakers. The majority of science communication, science outreach, science writing goes in English. So for me, it was a bit of it felt like really far away from my abilities when I was 25 or 26. So I carry on with my academic career, but then at some point I felt like I really wanted to go back to what was my perceived passion. I say perceived because you never know what your really passion is until you put your effort into it and you sweat on it and you fail about it. So it's just a dream until you just crash against it in a sort of way. But so when I came back to Italy after NASA, and I knew I wanted to go in communication, but communication is like science. It means nothing. Everything and nothing. Communication can be corporate communication, can be social media communication, media marketing management, so many things. And I didn't have a background in marketing, so I knew I couldn't go in corporate communication, even if I had a space background. So I started to write more about, for the general public, articles about space in a sort of outreach educational way. What does that mean? Like, oh, do you know what the moon is made of? Which is also my background because I'm a planetary geochemist. So I study the formation of the moon, the formation of Mars. I study rocks, in chemistry of rocks in the beginning of my career. And so I started to do that kind of classic science communication, you know, the one that you can read in the general magazines. And I found it a bit boring, if I can be honest with you. I felt like I didn't really I felt I was not making any difference. Simplifying well-known scientific concept, it wasn't for me. Let's put it that way. I don't want to say that it's useless or it's not worth it. There are fantastic outreach experts and educators that they love it, you know, just to translate really complex scientific concept to a very general audience. But I felt I was just repeating what I already said before. You know, how many times can you explain what is the moon made of? I don't know. So I felt, okay, I like the writing, I like the journalistic attitude, but I really need to find something that gives me a bit more intellectual pleasure, maybe we can call it this way. I mean, in the end, if you start working for NASA, you still want to use your brain for something. And so this was the period. This was 2020, give or take a couple of years, and it was Perseverance that landed on Mars. And I remember I was trying to write an article about it, and I started to look at the geopolitics of Mars. I always worked on Mars as a scientist. I was studying Mars rocks and Mars climate, etc. And so I never understood that there were a lot of countries flying over Mars, in orbiting Mars. There was not the US only. And, you know, I came from the US in terms of science, space science, and I was suddenly surprised to see the Emirates and China flying, orbiting around Mars, and say, what's going on here? And suddenly I realized that the geopolitical scenario changed completely in these years. There was not only one player, clearly there were more players. And because I knew how much it cost space exploration, I felt like, okay, there is no way that all those countries are just flying probes in the Mars atmosphere, in the Mars orbit, just because they want to test the chemistry of the atmosphere. I knew enough about atmospheric chemistry to know that it's not worth it, all this money. So I started to think, okay, let me see if there are some sides on this. Why so many countries are starting to invest in scientific exploration on the red planet or on the moon? And that's where the geopolitical dimension open up, and I realized that the sector was changing radically in terms of interest, in terms of funding, in terms of players. And this is where I started to write about the geopolitical space. And I started more or less from zero. I started to interview scientists and engineers, but also politicians, lawyers. And slowly I realized that there was all this dimension. And this was kind of interesting because you could see how the geopolitics of Earth was reflecting on space. And that's how we started, basically.
Fascinating. Okay, so the geopolitical element of it was not obvious at first as somebody in research, but the more you looked, the more you discovered and heard about these other players in the industry. So would you say, I mean, it sounds like it'd be fair to say that, you know, the public's perception of the reality of what's going on in space and what shapes the space economy is also probably not well known?
So in 2020, all this new space sector was exploding, was becoming the new gold rush, it was becoming the new climate change, the new internet. Everyone was discussing about the new space economy, how we're going to go to the moon and make money on the moon, how we're going to invest in asteroids mining, and it's going to be a blossoming of the world economy. So there's been a kind of renaissance. Everyone was so excited about it, and everybody was speaking about the geopolitics and economy of space, how new countries can get in and become new players. So there has been some few years of very positive attitudes, and everybody was excited. And then, as usual, it's been like, the kind of like the subprime kind of crisis. Everything exploded or imploded. Right. I mean, we have not imploded yet, to be honest. I think we're getting there, but we're not imploded yet. But what was pure positive attitude turned into a bit more, from my perspective, from people that are inside the sector, a bit more careful attitude. So my impression now is that the general public is still fed the story of the booming space economy, the $1 trillion economy, etc. But then the internal, the one that work in it, they know that there are subtleness to this discussion. And the subtleness is that there is a huge misunderstanding. There are two big misunderstandings at the moment when it comes to space economy. The first one is that we define space economy making the public believe that space economy means the money and the revenues attached to exploration of space as a sort of like romantic, as the traditional view of space. If you go to a group of non-space people and you ask them, what do you think about when you say space? They will tell you the moon, Mars, the stars, comets, astronauts. But in reality, the revenues are not attached to that part. It doesn't matter how much the storytelling goes promoted because it's nice, it's exciting, but the revenues of the space economy are the telecom economy, communication. Right. That's where the budget, that's where the revenue is building satellites to allow better, faster communication on Earth. For any type of reasons, commercial reason, defense reason, whatever. But that's where the revenues are. So when we're speaking about space economy, we should really speak about a telecom economy enabled by space structures, by satellite. Because the point is that they say, okay, all these economic benefits, they should not be there if we didn't have satellites in space, which is completely correct. They're right. Space is enabled. Space is an enabler for a multitude of digital and communication economies. So the real revenues in the air, they're still in your phone. They are in Meta, Instagram, Google, Samsung. These are the companies. It's still a digital communication economy, but it's enabled by GNSS chips, which are they are positioning location chips that are in your phone, and they connect with satellites. So it is correct to say that satellites are fundamental for our everyday life. It is very correct to say that satellites are enablers of a huge digital communication economy. It is slightly misleading to call this a space economy and allow the public to believe that is moon exploration or Mars exploration to drive the revenues, because that's incorrect. The second part that is incorrect is speaking about commercial sector as the driver. What is the difference from the 60s is that state entities, agencies, space agencies, NASA, CNES, whatever, instead of building everything in home, inside, which costs a lot for them, they basically procure what they need outside. So they ask outside private entities to build what they need. So they cut cost. That's what SpaceX does. That's how SpaceX was born. And we need a cheaper version of the shuttle. And we cannot build it here because it's just too expensive to build it under a government umbrella. So let's ask faster, lighter, more flexible private companies to do it for us. And then we pay for the service. So everyone is happy. However, with one single exception, which is SpaceX, every single space company that works in the hard structure of the space economy, which means everyone building launchers, manufacturing satellites, building ground station, preparing the antennas. So everyone that is actually building the infrastructure that allows satellites to go up in space and transmit is still very dependent from government money. Okay, so they have one client, and the client is the government.
Right.
Per se, there is no problem with that. Hospitals are built by governments, schools are built by governments, and we could think about space as a public infrastructure that allows the wealth and the growth of a nation. Totally fine by me. The problem, the philosophical problem is that we are somehow misleading the public, somehow selling the idea that the space sector is an independent market. The commercial market is not a commercial market. It's still a public funding supported market in which there are private actors, different. And the second problem, and this is probably where I should stop because it's not really my field, so I don't want to tell you something that is incorrect, but I'm not sure that on the long term, having only state-procured channels is sustainable for the sector. So the sector might need to find a way to start to become more independent from public money, but that's a challenge because this infrastructure costs a lot. This is where I leave it because it's a bit complicated than that.
I think that's a really useful breakdown of the reality of the situation. And specifically, I think for what is possibly a major audience for this podcast, which in my mind is probably young people with maybe, let's say, a vague idea or maybe a more specific idea that they want to work in space. And one element that, again, Sarah, as the founder of this organization, is particularly interested in improving is the access globally to get into that sector. So what would you say is the sort of state of that side of things? If you're a young person looking to, I don't know, be an aerospace engineer in NASA, or you have a really cool idea for what could be a commercial company eventually, a commercial startup potentially that's operating in the space economy, or you want to be an astronaut, those kinds of, moving from maybe the more traditional ideas to what are new jobs in the space sector that people aren't even thinking of, and how, what would the status be of the space sector as a possible viable career trajectory for a young person anywhere in the world? That's a very broad question, but again, I think what we're looking for is just to sort of set the scene and set realities in people's minds.
So there are, I think we can divide in two categories. One, if you're actually passionate about space, you want to become an astronaut, you want to become an aerospace engineer because you find it fascinating, and then you should pursue it because it's still an absolutely incredibly relevant sector. So if you want to become a space astronaut, or if you want to become a space engineer, or if you want to become someone working in the space sector, the sector needs you. So it's 100%. I think what Sarah is trying to do, and which I completely endorse, is the fact that you don't need to be a space engineer to work in the space sector. Look at me, I'm a geologist, I'm a geochemist, I study volcanoes for my first degree. So I ended up still through a science path, but I'm not a space engineer, I'm not an aerospace engineer. So I think what is important to understand is that there are other scientific paths that can still bring you to space, and then there are second thing is that space is not only space, it's also Earth. You can still be extremely committed to Earth problems and working in space. Think about Earth observations that support climate change, environmental challenge, societal issues. Even recently, a few months ago, I spoke with the NGO, and they were using space satellite imageries to track oil leaks, illegal oil leaks from vessels. And they have a bunch of really interesting, they have an incredible team, because in a sort of way, let's forget about the word space. Let's think about the use of satellites to enable a better life on Earth. Right. Then you can create all these different type of new activities. And this is what is exciting, in which science expertise and technological expertise and medicine and biology and journalism and lawyers can interact together, not for a vertical silo sector, but for a common cause. So let's take the fact, let's speak about the public, the audience, the younger that are passionate about the environment. You know, they want to participate in climate justice. They want to know how to be more involved. So there are so many ways in which space can interact with that. And even if with a degree in geography, you can actually end up in being an expert in understanding how to support this kind of causes, because everything, even the most passionate causes today, they kind of need to have a quantitative support, a data support. So you can be part of that. You can actually make the difference. And I'm a big believer in the fact that traditional disciplines, they will merge and remix. So the strength of all these new scientific discoveries of this space flow is bringing people from different angles all together. Let me give you an example. I am a scientist and now I work in journalism, and I really would love to have a laboratory. Maybe I should speak with Sarah about this. I really would love to have a laboratory when the engineers and the scientists and the commercial people, the entrepreneurs and the media people and the filmmakers and the journalist and the graphic designer all meet, and we think about exciting projects that could be useful for the society and that can have a really strong impact in terms of audience, in terms of communication. Because sometimes, this is quite interesting, from the media perspective, they completely don't understand what's going on in the scientific part. So they kind of follow the trends, and sometimes they give highlights to things that don't really make sense. The science perspective, they don't really understand what is impactful sometimes for the society. They kind of work in the academic mind. So they study something because it's interesting, but it doesn't have any application. Trying to put those things to character, two people together, two group of people together. One that knows what the people want, and one that really knows how to solve problems in a practical way, can really generate a new discipline. So I think the potential of space technologies or space science is to really generate new synergies between people coming from different groups and bringing what they know that might be not necessarily space science or space technology, but that can enrich something that includes space in a sort of way. And I think Earth observation environment really have a huge potential in that.
That's really good to hear, and really exciting that there's still opportunities there, and maybe new collaborations that people haven't even thought of yet.
Exactly.
But one element that I want to just zone in on then, something that, again, Sarah has, I know, personally referenced because it's from her own experience, is this idea of passport privilege. The fact that, a lot of this economy is very slanted towards the US right now. You hinted earlier that there are new players emerging. You mentioned the UAE having a probe, and China's obviously, I don't think we can call China emerging anymore.
It's emerged. It's emerged.
It's emerged. It's out. The cat's out the bag. Africa has got quite a lot of interesting satellite projects. Various countries are getting in on that action. But how real do you think this idea that, well, if you're from the global south, you're really locked out, or you've got a much harder job to bring, to get into the industry, and to your point earlier about bringing in different perspectives, if you've grown up in a different culture, if your stories about space or your relationship to space isn't what it is in the West, but you have something to contribute, do you have a harder time? Like, is this a real barrier to entry from your understanding of things?
Well, there are two. So the answer is yes. The quick answer is yes. There are two factors here playing. A, the fact that you have an original entry barrier from countries that they might not have a space tradition in a sort of way. It takes really a long time to train an engineer, any type of engineer. And so you might just come from a country that doesn't invest in that. So your legs are cut from the beginning. I visited a country in which science is not taught at school. If you don't teach basic science at primary school, you cannot expect a 17 years old or 18 years old being able to enroll in engineering. So you're already cutting the potential. So this is an internal problem. This is the internal bias, which I think has to be really tackle from education. A massive restructure of how education is perceived, and understanding that you cannot form minds only on the quick economic necessity of the moment. You really have to play the long game, and understanding that you as a country have the responsibility to form a class of citizens that can be versatile, not only able to just basically occupy simple, small position at the moment, because at the moment then the economy requires that. So the long-term educational system is a key. So having the potential engineers. Then there is the problem. The second problem is the external barrier coming from the Western bias. Because even if you're an excellent engineer, so even if you've been able to pass all those internal barriers, if you went to an excellent school, you're a fantastic engineer, top of your class, still probably, if you go out and you have the wrong passport, the wrong name, the wrong skin color, or the wrong passport, then probably still gonna have biases. You're still gonna have to show that you're twice as good to be recognized half of it. And because why? For two reasons. Partially because nations try to protect themselves. So if you're not a US engineers and they have to give you a salary, you have to demonstrate why. Why should we give you the money if we can hire a US person? In a sort of way, you accept it, because in England it works the same. You have to demonstrate that you're worth it, and there is nobody else in the UK or in the US that can do your job. Mm-hmm. But then there is the bias of the race, of the country, of the religion, of the skin color. The fact that you're not taken as seriously because you don't come from a pedigree country. If you don't come from Cambridge, you don't come from Oxford, you don't come from Harvard. You don't come from those countries that are recognized as traditional space countries. How do we change that? We change them now, every day, changing the culture, changing the mentality, allowing these countries to emerge. The problem is that the investment that you do now in education will ripe the fruits in 20 years, 30 years. So you need a political class, and you need a structure that is interested in investing today for something that will bring benefits in another generation. This should not stop them from doing it. This should not stop us to break these barriers. And I think something important for Sarah is that she believes that she representing the change. She can show that yes, it can be done. If I've done it, you can do it. Yes, I have a different accent. Yes, I'm not Western. Yes, I come from Egypt and still have made it. You can do it too. And this is important because in general, the concept of representation is fundamental. Children will not follow a path if they cannot recognize that they can do it. This is why it's important to have any type of gender, any type of color, any type of race, any type of religion, any type of language, any type of country in space, so that people, the new generation, can see the astronauts, can see the engineers, can see the Sarah of tomorrow and say, okay, I can be that too. I can be you one day, and I want to do it because you are inspirational. Because inspiration is one of the motions that push people, push the kids, push the youngster to do something. We know that it works for us too. You need a model. So I think that's where Sarah is also trying to go.
Do you think space is unique in its ability to inspire?
Well, it depends. I think he has a unique ability to inspire certain type of people. And this unique ability can be a strength, it can be a weakness. It can be a strength because it's an extremely powerful pool for certain type of people. If you're ambitious, if you like math, if you love engineering, if you have that kind of go and get it, risk taker, aiming high, you will end up in space. This is why space is also so rich of very ambitious people, is because it's an ambitious goal. You don't go into space if you want life easy. So you meet a lot of people that like to complicate their life a lot, and they like the challenge. So it's really, really an interesting, strong pool for this type of characters. However, it can be a weakness because automatically this type of features will automatically exclude those that don't feel they're a good fit. Oh, I don't like math. Oh, I'm not so ambitious. I'm scared of I don't want to be an astronaut. So in a sort of way, its strength is also its weakness because it attracts really a lot a certain type of people and then exclude all the others. So the thing here is to change the narrative and to show other ways. My opinion is that one day we should stop to speak to define it as space, because space is so attached to kind of final frontier, math, exploration, and then everybody else feel excluded. But if you start to discuss it about, you call it, environmental frontiers, global wealth, science, I don't know. I mean, I'm not, I cannot think about a name, but if you think about another name, then you have the potential to include also people that are not naturally attracted by the space dimension, but they might be attracted by other dimensions that are still linked with space.
Fascinating. Yeah. So maybe just to wrap up then, thinking about what the future of the industry, the future of space may hold, are there any particularly interesting innovations or maybe even just ideas or missions that you think maybe represent the best of what's possible from the space sector going forward that are worth highlighting, that you've come across recently?
But because I'm one of those people that actually love space when it applies to Earth, when it helps to resolve things that we as humans cannot see, and because I believe in the power of space as a social lift, I can tell you that there are a lot of... This is also very interesting, Stuart. Because space is flashy, it has a very strong branding, if you want to look at it from a marketing point of view.
Sure.
The projects that they get more presented are the ones that are the flashiest among the flash. So lunar missions, exploration in the ISS, spacewalking, Mars. Those are the big names. Okay, these are the missions that really attract and make people talk, etc. I do believe that there is a lot of dignity in those missions that don't get publicized, because they're not so flashy, but they still do a lot to support life on Earth and to create equality, inclusivity, and global wealth. For example, I spoke with projects in the Maldives to help to understand the Maldivians how to better plan the urbanization of the islands to avoid erosion. The Maldives suffers a huge erosive problems, not only related to climate, but also related to randomized urban planning, fundamentally. Okay. And satellites images can really help to visualize where the problem is. That's the power of it, and you can explain the audience, the local politician, this is what happens if you build an harbor in the wrong place. I felt that's an incredible opportunity to actually improve how a system is set up. Or researches in India to allow local farmers to obtain loans from the bank. This is a research I did some while ago, and with Satsur actually, which is an Indian company, and they are focused on Earth satellites for agriculture, but not simply for improve agriculture, but to allow local farmers to improve the agricultural yield so that they can obtain better loans from the banks.
Right.
And that fights poverty. Or I spoke with this is actually a commercial company, and they work in Africa, in Uganda, in Rwanda, to support local environmental issues with mining, with illegal mining, or with polluting mining, and or with poachers, with illegal poachers. They try to use satellites to monitor orangutans and in the jungle, and to monitor illegal poaching of protected animals. There are so many opportunities, so many projects that deserve way more visibility, and they are so well linked between technology and humanity here. These are the projects that personally I like the most. I struggle a bit with the pure space, because in the end it's flashy, it's romantic, but it doesn't really impact people on Earth. And I struggle with pure scientific missions, because in the end they feel, albeit very important, they feel a bit unrelated to the problems of the common people like me on Earth. So what I like the most, so you're going to have a biased view, I'm sorry, Stuart, on this, is those projects that they hit both the technology of space science, but with real people and real problems tackled on the ground. This is where my favorite That's where my vote goes.
I mean, I think that's a very reasonable bias to have, that you want things to be related to us here on Earth in a way that impacts people's lives positively. So thank you so much for that. I think we should just wrap it up. I wanted to just ask if there was any other sort of final points you wanted to make, or maybe final words of wisdom for, again, anybody that's maybe learning about some of these things for the first time in this conversation. What would you encourage them to go away and kind of do? Just a general reading, or is there a great way to start, or just a final bit of advice to impart on curious minds?
What, to keep being curious, because curiosity is one of those unique components of human beings that cannot be taken away. AI cannot replace curiosity. So, and to don't feel scared about the challenge that this sector can present, because the challenge is part of the fun. And to push doors, open doors, never stop, never be worried, never be scared. This is what Sarah does. This is what I admire a lot of her. She doesn't stop. She doesn't take no as an answer. Is the door closed? I'm going to push it and open it again. And I think this is what we should... I think it's a very interesting way, and is a very interesting motivation for young minds to don't get scared, don't feel excluded. And if they feel excluded, to do something for it, because that's not the end of it. Because if you feel excluded, then there is some work to do, us from our side, from the world side, and from your side, to push this and make sure that it's not what the next generation will perceive. So it's a constant work. Every generation has to push the boundaries, and I'm doing my part, I hope. You're probably doing yours, Sarah's doing hers. And, it's an encouragement to feel part, active actor in what's going on, to don't perceive it as a dimension that cannot be touched or cannot be included. So, yeah, I think this is something that can be maybe said.
Dr. Emma Gatti, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Stuart. It was a pleasure.
Great.